Ladies and gentlemen, what if the greatest evidence of transformation in your life isn't found in what you say, what you believe, or even what you pray for, but in a sign that quietly follows you wherever you go? Not a sign you chase, not a badge you wear, but a living proof that something supernatural has taken root inside you. Too often we search for confirmation in outward success, visible power, or dramatic moments, yet heaven often measures differently. There is a sign that cannot be manufactured, cannot be faked, and cannot be sustained by human effort alone. We live in a world hungry for proof, desperate for authenticity, and weary of empty promises. People are not convinced by noise anymore. They are moved by presence. They are not drawn by arguments alone. They are transformed by encounters. And the question before us today is not whether you have knowledge, gifting, or passion. The real question is whether your life carries a sign that points unmistakably to a higher reality at work within you. This sign shows up when pressure increases and peace remains. It reveals itself when forgiveness replaces offense, when hope rises in impossible circumstances, when love flows without demand for return. It is evidence that you are not merely surviving by strength, but living from a source that never runs dry. This sign is not loud, yet it is undeniable. It doesn't strive for attention, yet it commands it. When this sign is present, atmospheres change. Fear loses its authority. Despair finds no place to stay. Ordinary moments become charged with purpose because something greater is being released through a yielded life. This is not about perfection. It is about alignment, not about performance, but about presence. Today is an invitation to examine what follows you, not what you chase, not what you claim, but what consistently manifests around you. Because when the right sign is present, you don't have to convince anyone. Your life becomes the message and the evidence speaks for itself. There is a powerful difference between a sign that follows you and a sign you spend your life chasing. When something follows you, it is effortless, natural, and consistent. But when you chase something, it often controls you, exhausts you, and defines your sense of worth. Many people live driven by the pursuit of validation, breakthrough, recognition, or success, believing that if they can just reach the next milestone, they will finally be confirmed. Yet the most authentic evidence of transformation is not found in what you run after, but in what quietly runs after you. What follows you reveals what truly lives within you. A sign that follows you does not require constant explanation. You do not have to announce it, defend it, or force others to notice it. It becomes visible in the way you respond when circumstances are unfair, when doors close, when expectations are unmet. It shows itself when peace appears in moments that once produced anxiety, when clarity rises in seasons of confusion, when resilience replaces despair. This kind of sign is not a performance, it is a byproduct. It is the overflow of an inner reality that has been cultivated over time. Chasing signs often leads people into comparison. They begin measuring their journey against someone else's results, someone else's timing, someone else's platform. But what follows you is uniquely designed for your assignment. It carries your fingerprints, your history, your lessons, and your growth. No one else can duplicate it because it was never meant to be copied. It emerges from alignment, not ambition, and it grows stronger as you remain faithful in unseen moments. When a sign follows you, it has the power to influence environments without striving. Rooms feel different when you enter. Conversations shift toward hope. Solutions begin to emerge where there was once tension. This is not because of charisma or personality, but because something greater is at work through you. People may not be able to articulate what they sense, but they recognize it. They feel safe, seen, and strengthened simply by being near it. This kind of sign also has endurance. What you chase can fade when pressure increases, but what follows you remains steady. It does not depend on applause or favorable conditions. It stays with you in hidden seasons, quiet seasons, and waiting seasons. It teaches you patience without passivity and confidence without arrogance. Over time, it becomes a witness to consistency, proving that transformation is not an event, but a process. A sign that follows you reshapes your priorities. Instead of asking what you need to do next, you begin asking who you are becoming. Instead of seeking platforms, you focus on posture. Instead of forcing outcomes, you steward integrity. This internal shift produces external fruit without manipulation. People trust it because it feels real. It carries weight because it has been tested. There is also freedom in allowing signs to follow rather than chasing them. Freedom from striving, freedom from fear of missing out, freedom from constant self-evaluation. You begin to rest in the understanding that what is meant to manifest will emerge at the right time. Your role is not to manufacture proof, but to remain aligned with the source that produces it. As this becomes your way of living, you stop asking whether others notice you and start noticing what consistently appears around you. You observe patterns of peace, doors opening unexpectedly, favor that cannot be explained, strength rising when it should be depleted. These are not accidents, they are indicators. They reveal that something authentic is at work beneath the surface, quietly shaping your path, steadily accompanying your steps, making itself known not through pursuit, but through presence that continues to unfold in everyday moments. Where trust is formed, decisions are tested, and inner alignment continues to deepen through experiences that shape character and refine perspective without demanding attention or applause. Evidence of transformation goes far beyond the words you speak or the gifts you display. Words can inspire, but they can also be rehearsed. Gifts can impress, but they can be exercised without depth. True transformation reveals itself in ways that cannot be staged or sustained by effort alone. It is seen in patterns and consistency and responses that emerge without calculation. It is the quiet proof that something internal has shifted, and that shift is now shaping everything external. Many people equate evidence with visibility. They believe that if something is real, it must be loud, public, and obvious. But genuine change often begins in places no one applauds. It starts in private decisions, unseen battles, and moments where character is chosen over convenience. Over time, those private victories form a public witness, not because they were designed to be seen, but because they cannot remain hidden. What is transformed within eventually expresses itself outwardly. Gifts operate through ability, but transformation operates through being. A person can function in gifting while remaining unchanged in nature. They can move others emotionally while remaining untouched internally. Transformation, however, alters the source. It changes motivations, reactions, and priorities. T replaces the need to prove something with the freedom to live from something. When this happens, people sense depth even when nothing spectacular is happening. The strongest evidence of transformation is often revealed under pressure. When circumstances tighten, true nature surfaces. Old patterns once driven by fear, anger, or insecurity lose their grip. New responses emerge, patience where there was impatience, trust where there was control, compassion where there was judgment. These shifts may seem small, but they carry enormous weight. They testify that growth is real, not theoretical. Transformation also changes how success is defined. Instead of measuring progress by external achievement alone, there's an increasing awareness of internal alignment. Peace becomes a marker. Integrity becomes a compass. Faithfulness in small things becomes as valuable as influence in large ones. This redefinition protects the heart from burnout and disappointment because identity is no longer tied to performance. Another sign of authentic transformation is sustainability. What is built on hype eventually collapses, but what is formed through change endures. When enthusiasm fades or recognition disappears, the transformed life remains steady. It continues to love, to serve, to believe, even when there is no immediate reward. This endurance speaks louder than any momentary display of power or talent. Transformation also reshapes relationships. It softens defensiveness and opens space for understanding. It allows listening without needing to win and speaking without needing to dominate. People begin to feel valued rather than managed, inspired rather than pressured. This relational shift is not strategic, it is instinctive. It flows naturally from a heart that has learned to operate from abundance rather than lack. As transformation deepens, humility increases. There is less need to draw attention to progress because gratitude replaces pride. Awareness grows that every step forward is supported by grace, not personal strength alone. This humility does not diminish confidence, it grounds it. It creates a stability that others can lean on without fear of collapse. Over time, the evidence becomes undeniable, not because of constant victories, but because of consistent character. Not because of dramatic moments, but because of faithful ones. Lives are influenced not by perfection, but by authenticity that remains intact through changing seasons. This is the kind of evidence that cannot be argued with because it is lived, observed, and experienced in countless small interactions where truth quietly reveals itself through presence, resilience, and a depth that continues to unfold without announcement, drawing others toward hope through what is consistently embodied rather than what is claimed. Presence has a voice that performance can never imitate. Performance relies on timing, energy, and the approval of others. But presence flows from an internal reality that remains steady regardless of the environment. When presence leads, there is no pressure to impress, no urgency to be noticed, no need to prove value. Something deeper is at work, and people feel it long before they understand it. This is why presence speaks louder than performance, because it communicates authenticity without effort. Performance draws attention to what a person can do, but presence draws attention to who a person is becoming. Actions may capture interest for a moment, but presence leaves an impression that lingers. It is felt in the calm that settles into a room, the trust that begins to form in conversation, the sense of safety that allows honesty to surface. These are not the results of skill alone. They are the effects of an inner alignment that cannot be manufactured. When life becomes demanding, performance often collapses. It depends on energy, preparation, and favorable conditions. Presence, however, remains intact under pressure. It does not retreat when plans fail or when recognition fades. It shows up in the way someone listens when they could speak, stays grounded when others panic, and responds with clarity when confusion is rising. This steadiness becomes a silent testimony that something deeper is sustaining them. Presence also removes the burden of comparison. Performance thrives on measurement, constantly asking who is ahead, who is better, who is more effective. Presence is not threatened by another's success because it is rooted in identity rather than competition. When someone is secure in presence, they celebrate others freely, learn without defensiveness, and grow without resentment. This freedom is contagious, inviting others into the same rest. There is also authority in presence that cannot be taught. It is not loud, forceful, or demanding, yet it carries weight. Words spoken from presence land differently. They do not rush, exaggerate, or manipulate. They are measured, intentional, and timely. Even silence holds meaning. People listen not because they are compelled to, but because they trust what is being released. Performance seeks control over outcomes, but presence surrenders control while maintaining responsibility. This shift changes everything. Instead of forcing results, there is a confidence that allows space for process. Instead of reacting emotionally, there is discernment that guides responses. This does not make a person passive, it makes them precise. They act from conviction rather than impulse, from wisdom rather than urgency. Presence also transforms how challenges are faced. Difficult conversations become opportunities for understanding rather than battlegrounds. Opposition becomes a PL, ace for growth rather than defense. Even failure loses its power to define identity. It becomes a teacher instead of a verdict. This resilience is not self-generated. It flows from a deeper awareness that worth is not at risk. Over time, people begin to recognize the difference. They may not use the word presence, but they describe it as peace, confidence, depth, or authenticity. They say things like, something feels different, something feels solid, something feels real. This recognition does not come from polished delivery or flawless execution, but from consistency across moments both visible and unseen. As presence continues to grow, performance naturally finds its proper place. Skills are refined, gifts are expressed, and actions carry greater impact. But they are no longer the foundation. They become the expression of what already exists within. The need to be seen fades, replaced by the desire to be faithful. The need to impress dissolves, replaced by the commitment to remain aligned. In this way, presence becomes a language spoken without words. It communicates hope without preaching, strength without force, and truth without argument. It fills spaces quietly, influences hearts steadily, and remains when the noise fades. This is why presence always speaks louder than performance, because it does not rely on momentary attention, but on a depth that continues to shape environments, relationships, and decisions through an unseen but undeniable reality that carries weight long after actions are forgotten and applause has ceased. Peace that remains under pressure is one of the clearest indicators that something deeper than circumstance is at work. Pressure has a way of exposing what is superficial and revealing what is genuine. When stress increases, deadlines tighten, expectations rise, and uncertainty grows, most people instinctively shift into survival mode. Anxiety takes the lead, reactions become sharper, and fear begins to dictate decisions. Yet there are moments when pressure rises and peace does not leave, when the external environment grows chaotic, but the internal atmosphere remains steady, and that contrast speaks louder than words. This kind of peace is not denial, and it is not indifference. It does not ignore reality or minimize difficulty. It looks directly at the challenge without being overwhelmed by it. It acknowledges the weight of the moment while refusing to surrender to panic. This peace is grounded, alert, and present. It allows clear thinking when emotions are demanding control. It creates space between what happens and how one responds. And in that space, wisdom begins to operate. Pressure often demands immediate answers, but peace brings patience. Instead of rushing toward quick fixes or reactive choices, there is a calm confidence that allows time for discernment. This does not slow progress, it sharpens it. Decisions made from peace tend to be more accurate, more sustainable, and less damaging. They are not driven by fear of loss or urgency to prove something, but by trust in a process that extends beyond the moment. When peace remains under pressure, it also affects the people nearby. Anxiety is contagious, but so is calm. In tense environments, a steady presence becomes an anchor. Conversations soften, perspectives widen, solutions begin to surface. People feel permission to breathe, to think, to reset. This influence does not come from control or authority, but from internal stability that quietly shifts the atmosphere. Pressure has a way of testing identity. It asks questions like, who are you when things don't go as planned? Who are you when outcomes are uncertain? Who are you when effort doesn't immediately produce results? Peace answers those questions without defensiveness. It signals that identity is not tied to performance, approval, or control. It reveals a foundation that remains intact even when conditions are unstable. This peace is often built in unseen places. It is formed through repeated choices to trust rather than worry, to release what cannot be controlled, to stay grounded when emotions want to escalate. Over time, these choices create an internal reflex. When pressure arrives, the response is no longer chaos, but calm. Not because the situation is easy, but because the source of stability is deeper than the situation. Peace under pressure also brings endurance. Stress without peace leads to burnout, but pressure carried with peace produces strength. Energy is preserved. Focus remains intact. There is resilience to continue without becoming hardened. This endurance is not fueled by sheer willpower, but by alignment with something constant that does not fluctuate with circumstances. There is also clarity that comes with this peace. When fear dominates, vision narrows, options feel limited, everything appears urgent. Peace widens perspective. It restores the ability to see possibilities, to recognize timing, to discern what truly matters. It separates what feels loud from what is actually important. This clarity becomes especially valuable in moments where one decision can alter an entire direction. Peace that remains under pressure does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges lose their authority to define the inner world. There may still be effort, confrontation, and difficult conversations, but they are approached without inner turmoil. Strength and gentleness coexist. Confidence and humility operate together. Action flows from stability rather than agitation. Over time, this peace becomes recognizable. Others notice it not because it is announced, but because it is consistent. It shows up in crises, in conflict, in waiting seasons, and in moments of uncertainty. It becomes a quiet testimony that pressure does not have the final word, that circumstances are not the ultimate source of stability, and that there is a deeper reality sustaining the inner life, even when everything outside is demanding attention, answers, and outcomes all at once. Love and forgiveness are not abstract ideas or emotional responses reserved for ideal circumstances. They are visible proofs of inner transformation. When love and forgiveness appear consistently, especially in situations where they are least deserved or least expected, they reveal a depth that cannot be explained by personality alone. These qualities surface not as reactions, but as choices shaped by a renewed inner life. They demonstrate that something powerful has taken root beyond natural instinct. In moments of offense, the natural response is self-protection. The impulse to withdraw, retaliate, or hold on to resentment often feels justified. Yet when forgiveness replaces offense, it interrupts that instinct. It does not deny the pain or excuse the wrong. It simply refuses to let the wound become an identity. Forgiveness frees the heart from being governed by past harm and opens space for healing that bitterness would otherwise block. Love, in its truest form, is not dependent on agreement or comfort. It shows up when understanding is incomplete and when differences remain unresolved. It listens without preparing a defense. It remains present when walking away would be easier. This kind of love is not passive, it is intentional. It chooses connection over control and compassion over condemnation. When people encounter this love, they recognize that it is not transactional. It does not demand anything in return. Forgiveness also reshapes power dynamics. Holding offense creates the illusion of control, but it actually hands authority to the very thing that caused harm. Forgiveness reclaims that authority. It allows a person to move forward without dragging the weight of resentment behind them. This internal freedom often produces external peace, not because situations immediately change, but because the heart is no longer confined by the past. When love and forgiveness become visible patterns rather than isolated acts, they create credibility. People trust what they see lived out consistently. They notice when someone responds with kindness instead of sarcasm, patience instead of withdrawal, grace instead of judgment. These responses stand out precisely because they are rare. They signal that something deeper is guiding behavior beyond emotion or convenience. Love expressed through action becomes a stabilizing force in relationships. It diffuses tension, de-escalates conflict, and creates space for honest dialogue. Forgiveness keeps relationships from calcifying into rigid roles defined by past mistakes. Together, they allow growth to remain possible. They communicate that people are not reduced to their worst moments and that restoration is always within reach. These qualities also require strength. It takes courage to remain loving when misunderstood and to forgive when there has been no apology. This strength is not aggressive or loud. It is quiet and resilient. It draws from a source that does not diminish when extended. In fact, the more it is exercised, the more capacity it seems to create. This is why love and forgiveness do not weaken a person, they fortify them. Over time, practicing love and forgiveness reshapes perception. Situations once seen through the lens of offense begin to be viewed with empathy. People once labeled as adversaries are recognized as complex and wounded. This shift does not remove boundaries, but it removes hostility. It allows discernment without contempt and truth. Without cruelty. Love and forgiveness also protect the heart from becoming hardened. Repeated disappointment can easily lead to cynicism, but these qualities keep the inner life soft without making it fragile. They allow sensitivity without vulnerability to manipulation. This balance is rare and deeply attractive because it reflects both strength and tenderness operating together. As these traits continue to be expressed, they become unmistakable signs, not because they are dramatic, but because they are transformative. They alter environments, influence culture, and invite others into a different way of relating. People may not immediately understand the source, but they feel the impact. Love and forgiveness, lived consistently, become undeniable evidence that change is real, that healing is possible, and that a life shaped by grace carries a weight that words alone can never achieve. Continuing to unfold through everyday interactions where patience is tested, misunderstandings arise, and opportunities to choose compassion over offense repeatedly present themselves in ways that quietly reveal the depth of inner renewal at work. Alignment with a higher source shifts the entire framework of how life is lived. When effort is driven purely by self-reliance, there is constant pressure to maintain control, prove worth, and sustain outcomes through personal strength. This approach often produces moments of success followed by seasons of exhaustion. But when alignment replaces self-effort, the burden lifts. Life is no longer carried by striving alone, but by cooperation with something greater that supplies direction, strength, and timing beyond human limitation. Self-effort depends heavily on willpower. It pushes, forces, and accelerates, often ignoring the cost to the inner life. Alignment, on the other hand, cultivates sensitivity. It listens before it moves. It values obedience over urgency and faithfulness over speed. This does not result in passivity, it produces precision. Actions become more intentional because they are guided rather than driven. Energy is invested where it matters most, rather than scattered through constant reaction. When alignment becomes the priority, identity stabilizes. There is less fluctuation based on success or failure. Confidence no longer rises and falls with external validation. Instead, there is a steady sense of belonging and purpose that remains intact through changing circumstances. This stability allows for humility without insecurity and confidence without arrogance. It becomes possible to lead, serve, and create without the hidden need for approval. One of the most noticeable effects of alignment is peace in decision-making. Self-effort often creates anxiety around choices driven by fear of making the wrong move or missing an opportunity. Alignment brings trust. Decisions are still thoughtful, but they are not frantic. There is room for patience, for waiting, and for clarity to emerge. Even when outcomes are uncertain, there's assurance that direction is not dependent on personal perfection. Alignment also transforms how obstacles are perceived. Instead of viewing resistance as a sign to push harder, there is discernment to recognize whether a door is meant to be opened, walked around, or left closed. This discernment saves energy and protects the heart from unnecessary frustration. It allows progress without aggression and perseverance without burnout. Operating from alignment shifts the source of strength. Rather than drawing from finite emotional or physical reserves, there is access to renewal that does not depend on circumstances. This does not eliminate fatigue, but it prevents depletion from becoming identity. Rest becomes productive rather than indulgent. Renewal becomes a right, rather than a reward. This rhythm sustains long-term impact rather than short-lived intensity. Alignment also produces consistency. Self-effort often excels in short bursts but struggles with endurance. Alignment creates steady movement. Small, faithful steps accumulate into lasting progress. This consistency builds trust with others because it is reliable. People know what to expect not because of rigid patterns, but because of grounded character. There is also freedom in releasing self-effort. Control loosens its grip. The need to manage every outcome diminishes. This freedom creates space for creativity, joy, and genuine connection. Relationships become less transactional. Collaboration becomes easier because there is no competition for significance. Everyone is seen as a contributor rather than a threat. As alignment deepens, there is an increasing awareness of timing. Not everything needs to happen immediately. There is wisdom in waiting and courage in moving when the moment arrives. This sense of timing protects against both delay and haste. It allows action to flow naturally from readiness rather than pressure. Over time, the contrast becomes clear. A life driven by self-effort feels heavy, while a life shaped by alignment feels anchored. Challenges still arise, responsibilities still demand attention, and effort is still required, but it is no longer lonely or strained. There is a sense of partnership with a source that does not exhaust or abandon. This partnership becomes evident in the way strength renews, clarity returns, and direction remains steady even when the path is not fully visible, revealing that true effectiveness flows not from striving harder, but from remaining aligned with what sustains life beyond human capacity in moments where trust is chosen over control and surrender becomes the doorway to lasting strength. When a life is truly yielded, it carries the power to change atmospheres without effort or announcement. Yielding is not weakness or passivity. It is the conscious decision to release control and allow something greater to lead. In a yielded life, intentions are surrendered, reactions are softened, and outcomes are trusted. This posture creates space for influence that does not rely on authority, volume, or persuasion. Instead, transformation begins to occur simply because of presence. Atmospheres shift when inner alignment is stronger than external noise. Tension enters a room and quietly loses its edge. Conversations that once felt guarded become open. Fear that lingered beneath the surface begins to loosen its grip. This does not happen because problems disappear, but because the emotional climate changes. People sense safety, stability, and clarity where confusion once dominated. These shifts are often subtle, yet deeply impactful. A yielded life brings order to chaos without trying to manage it. Rather than reacting to every stimulus, there is discernment about what requires engagement and what requires stillness. This discernment prevents emotional escalation and preserves peace. When others feel pressured to respond immediately, a yielded life models patience. When others feel compelled to defend themselves, a yielded life demonstrates trust. These responses introduce a different rhythm into environments that are used to urgency and control. Yielded lives also carry authority without force. Authority rooted in surrender does not need to demand attention, it naturally attracts it. Words spoken from this place are not rushed or inflated. They carry weight because they are aligned with truth rather than ego. Even silence becomes meaningful. People listen not because they are intimidated, but because they recognize sincerity and depth. This kind of influence extends beyond individual I to your actions. Over time, entire cultures can shift. Teams become healthier, families become more connected, communities become more resilient, not because of strategies imposed from the top, but because of values embodied consistently. Yielding creates space for trust, and trust becomes the foundation for sustainable change. Atmospheres are also shaped by emotional regulation. A yielded life is not ruled by impulses or moods. Emotions are acknowledged without being obeyed. This stability reassures others, especially in moments of crisis. When fear tries to dominate, calm interrupts it. When anger seeks expression, gentleness redirects it. These internal choices ripple outward. altering how situations unfold. Yielding also creates openness to wisdom. Instead of relying solely on personal perspective, there is a readiness to receive insight from beyond the self. This openness increases clarity and reduces blind spots. Decisions made from this posture tend to be more balanced, considering both immediate needs and long-term impact. This foresight contributes to environments that feel secure and forward-moving. There is also humility in a yielded life that reshapes power dynamics. Pride often hardens atmospheres, making them rigid and unapproachable. Yielding softens them. It invites collaboration rather than competition. It values contribution over control. People feel seen rather than managed. This relational shift alone can transform how spaces function. Yielded lives carry consistency that builds credibility. The atmosphere does not change only in ideal conditions. It changes in stress, conflict, and uncertainty. This reliability allows others to trust the influence being released. They know it is not situational or conditional. It is rooted in something deeper than convenience. As yielding becomes a way of living, it also increases sensitivity to what environments need. Sometimes that need is encouragement. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is truth spoken with courage. A yielded life discerns this without striving. It responds rather than reacts. This responsiveness keeps atmospheres from stagnating or escalating unnecessarily. Over time, the effect becomes unmistakable. Spaces feel lighter. Interactions feel more honest. Progress feels possible even when challenges remain. This is not the result of personal charisma or deliberate influence. It is the natural outcome of surrender that allows something greater to move freely through a life. Atmospheres change because alignment creates flow. Trust replaces tension, and presence introduces a higher order that quietly reshapes everything it touches, revealing how a yielded life becomes a living catalyst for transformation in places where control once dominated and fear once dictated the tone of every interaction. When a life is truly yielded, it carries the power to change atmospheres without effort or announcement. Yielding is not weakness or passivity. It is the conscious decision to release control and allow something greater to lead. In a yielded life, intentions are surrendered, reactions are softened, and outcomes are trusted. This posture creates space for influence that does not rely on authority, volume, or persuasion. Instead, transformation begins to occur simply because of presence. Atmospheres shift when inner alignment is stronger than external noise. Tension enters a room and quietly loses its edge. Conversations that once felt guarded become open. Fear that lingered beneath the surface begins to loosen its grip. This does not happen because problems disappear, but because the emotional climate changes. People sense safety, stability, and clarity where confusion once dominated. These shifts are often subtle yet deeply impactful. A yielded life brings order, or chaos without trying to manage it. Rather than reacting to every stimulus, there is discernment about what requires engagement and what requires stillness. This discernment prevents emotional escalation and preserves peace. When others feel pressured to respond immediately, a yielded life models patience. When others feel compelled to defend themselves, a yielded life demonstrates trust. These responses introduce a different rhythm into environments that are used to urgency and control. Yielded lives also carry authority without force. Authority rooted in surrender does not need to demand attention. It naturally attracts it. Words spoken from this place are not rushed or inflated. They carry weight because they are aligned with truth rather than ego. Even silence becomes meaningful. People listen not because they are intimidated, but because they recognize sincerity and depth. This kind of influence extends beyond individual interactions. Over time, entire cultures can shift. Teams become healthier. Families become more connected. Communities become more resilient, not because of strategies imposed from the top, but because of values embodied consistently. Yielding creates space for trust, and trust becomes the foundation for sustainable change. Atmospheres are also shaped by emotional regulation. A yielded life is not ruled by impulses or moods. Emotions are acknowledged without being obeyed. This stability reassures others, especially in moments of crisis. When fear tries to dominate, calm interrupts it. When anger seeks expression, gentleness redirects it. These internal choices ripple outward, altering how situations unfold. Yielding also creates openness to wisdom. Instead of relying solely on personal perspective, there is a readiness to receive insight from beyond the self. This openness increases clarity and reduces blind spots. Decisions made from this posture tend to be more balanced, considering both immediate needs and long-term impact. This foresight contributes to environments that feel secure and forward-moving. There is also humility in a yielded life that reshapes power dynamics. Pride often hardens atmospheres, making them rigid and unapproachable. Yielding softens them. It invites collaboration rather than competition. It values contribution over control. People feel seen rather than managed. This relational shift alone can transform how spaces function. Yielded lives carry consistency that builds credibility. The atmosphere does not change only in ideal conditions. It changes in stress, conflict, and uncertainty. This reliability allows others to trust the influence being released. They know it is not situational or conditional. It is rooted in something deeper than convenience. As yielding becomes a way of living, it also increases sensitivity to what environments need. Sometimes that need is encouragement. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is truth spoken with courage. A yielded life discerns this without striving. It responds rather than reacts. This responsiveness keeps atmospheres from stagnating or escalating unnecessarily. Over time, the effect becomes unmistakable. Spaces feel lighter. Interactions feel more honest. Progress feels possible even when challenges remain. This is not the result of personal charisma or deliberate influence. It is the natural outcome of surrender that allows something greater to move freely through a life. Atmospheres change because alignment creates flow, trust replaces tension, and presence introduces a higher order that quietly reshapes everything it touches. A life that becomes undeniable evidence does not set out to prove anything, yet it quietly answers questions people are afraid to ask. It is not built on perfection or constant success, but on authenticity that remains intact across seasons. This kind of life speaks without insisting on attention. It reveals truth through consistency, through choices made when no one is watching, through reactions that no longer match old patterns. Over time, it becomes clear that something real is shaping the person from the inside out. Undeniable evidence is formed in ordinary moments. It shows up in how setbacks are handled, how waiting is endured, how disappointment is processed. Instead of collapsing under unmet expectations, there is resilience. Instead of becoming cynical after loss, there is hope. These responses are not forced. They flow naturally from an inner transformation that has taken root. People may not immediately recognize it as evidence, but they feel its weight. This kind of life does not rely on explanation. It does not argue, defend, or attempt to convince. It simply remains faithful to what it has become. When questions arise, the answers are found in patterns rather than speeches. Integrity stays consistent. Character does not shift with convenience. What is lived privately aligns with what is seen publicly, and this alignment creates trust that words alone cannot build. As time passes, the evidence accumulates. Relationships grow healthier rather than more fractured. Influence expands without manipulation. Responsibility increases without arrogance. These outcomes are not accidental. They reflect a foundation that has been strengthened through surrender, discipline, and trust. Even failures contribute to the testimony because they are met with humility rather than denial and growth rather than retreat. A life that is undeniable evidence also carries stability and uncertainty. When others are shaken by change, this life adapts without losing its core. When plans are disrupted, purpose remains. This stability does not come from control, but from anchoring identity beyond circumstances. It allows flexibility without confusion and confidence without rigidity. People are drawn to this kind of life not because it is flawless, but because it is real. They sense honesty without harshness, conviction without pride, strength without domination. There is room for questions, room for doubt, room for process. This openness creates connection. It invites others to consider change not as pressure, but as possibility. Undeniable evidence also carries endurance. Trends fade, excitement wanes, and attention shifts, but this life continues forward. It does not require constant motivation because it is fueled by conviction. It does not depend on recognition because it is rooted in purpose. This endurance becomes especially visible in long seasons where progress feels slow, but faithfulness remains. There is also generosity in this kind of life. It gives without keeping score. It invests without demanding return. It celebrates others without jealousy. This generosity signals abundance rather than scarcity. It reflects a heart that is secure enough to share credit, time, and opportunity freely. Over time, resistance softens around this kind of evidence. Skepticism loses its edge. Arguments quiet themselves. Not because everyone suddenly agrees, but because the life itself becomes difficult to dismiss. It carries coherence. What is believed aligns with how it is lived. What is spoken aligns with how others are treated. This coherence becomes persuasive without intention. A life that becomes undeniable evidence does not rush its own impact. It trusts the process of becoming. It allows growth to be gradual and deep rather than quick and hollow. It understands that lasting influence is formed through repetition, patience, and faithfulness. Each day adds another layer, another decision, another quiet confirmation that transformation is real. In this way, the life itself becomes the message, not a slogan, not a performance, not a moment, but an ongoing testimony expressed through presence, consistency, and character. It answers questions without debate and invites curiosity without pressure. It stands as living proof that change is possible, that renewal is real, and that a life shaped from the inside out naturally reveals its source through the way it continues to show up, respond, and remain grounded in truth across moments both seen and unseen, where trust is tested, choices are refined, and inner alignment continues to mature through daily practice and lived conviction.